some from some, uh, let's see, Josephus. We read some Greco-Roman historians. Hopefully you enjoyed my tales of Antiochus. So learned a little bit more about him. Like I said, he's famous for his debauchery. Pretty much everywhere I read, he's painted in a very similar light. So if we get a chance today, we might read some from the Maccabees. And guess what? He's not any better in that book as well. So, but let's dive into Hanukkah Heroes and Villains. So remember a very important fact that we started looking at the story of Hanukkah in the big perspective, broad view, okay? And that means realizing that what happened here in this tiny little land, okay, right here, it just has to do with this whole world that has been conquered by Alexander the Great, really. It really all began with him. And so we stopped our discussions of the Hanukkah story and really the historical background, what was happening with his kingdom falling apart with Alexander. And I told you how he conquered all this land, and by the age of 33, he dies. He leaves it to the strongest, and his generals take over and divide up the land. And of course, Israel is caught in the middle of two kingdoms fighting for territory, fighting for the land. And so Israel is basically in between Egypt, the Ptolemy Empire, and Seleucus, the Seleucid Empire to the north. So Israel just happens in the middle, and that's how they get entangled into all of this fighting. So it's important for us to keep in mind that the story of Hanukkah falls in line with a much, much bigger story. So we stopped looking at Alexander the Great because really he kind of sets up a lot of these events. And today I wanted to continue looking at that. So according to Josephus, Alexander had a very special relationship with Jerusalem. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't know this. If you read these records in Josephus, then the story I'm going to tell you in just the next few minutes is going to be very familiar. If you haven't, this is your chance to kind of hear this. So as Alexander marched, remember he started out in Europe, he united Greece, and then he went on further conquering those nations. So that means he would go through the cities of Asia Minor, Anatolia, and then he would move further down the coastline, and eventually he gets to the city of Tyre, which is modern-day Lebanon, okay? So Tyre, Byblos, these are ancient cities of the Phoenicians, by the way. They're sort of kind of like Semitic people, but not exactly. Some culture they have similar with the Greeks more so. And so he comes to the city of Tyre, and that's an important city for him to conquer. And as he besieges Tyre, he sends out messengers for aid, for his troops, for supplies. He sends his messengers to Jerusalem and to other surrounding cities. Now you have to realize Tyre is not exactly near Jerusalem, but the big cities in the vicinity, Jerusalem would be it. Back in those days, there wasn't Haifa. That was not a big place. So he sends out messengers to all those other cities, and the high priest in Jerusalem, his name was Jaddua, he responds to his messengers, but he says to him that he swore to Darius. You remember, Alexander is fighting Darius III. He swore to Darius and the Persians not to take side against him in war. Basically, he's hedging his bets, because you have to realize the Persians are in charge of Israel at that moment. They're part of the Persian Empire. And he swore his allegiance to the Persians not to get involved in any conflict. I'm not going to take sides in the war. If you guys decide to fight, I'm just going to stay out of it. Well, because basically every time Jews don't stay out of it, we get demolished. So this is what happens. So he says, I'm not going to get involved, I'm not going to take sides. So he doesn't help him. Well, you realize that that's not going to be good. So Alexander takes Tyre, finally. He takes that city. And then he moves south to Gaza. He takes the city we call Gaza. He conquers them, demolishes that completely. And after Gaza, he turns back to Jerusalem. Not he went down south almost to the very Sinai Peninsula. And now he says, okay, time to backtrack a little bit. He comes back to Jerusalem. And now Jerusalem is in trouble. because they denied him help when he was besieging Gaza. And this is where our story picks up in Josephus. So this is Josephus' Antiquities, chapter 11. We read his account. It says, Jaddua, the high priest, when he heard that, meaning that the Gaza fell, he was in agony and under terror, not knowing how he should meet the Macedonians, since the king was displeased at his foregoing disobedience. He therefore ordained that the people should make supplications and should join with him in offering sacrifices to God, whom he besought to protect that nation and to deliver them from the perils that were coming upon them. Now I'm going to stop here for a second and let's notice what's going on. So we have here Jaddua the high priest. He is the high priest at that moment in Jerusalem. And he's now scared because Alexander's army is now marching upon Jerusalem. He has no idea what to do. And when he has no idea what to do, look at his reaction. Look at what he does. He tells people, make supplications, offer sacrifices to God, because he's the one who would be protecting this nation. We're in trouble. We're about to get demolished. So pray hard. Ask God for help, beseech him, bring the sacrifices. Look at the response of this priest. He does not send out messengers to fortify the city or anything like that. He just says, we're going to pray that God will deliver us out of this situation. So it's a very telling response. I mean, remember, we talk about Hanukkah and we say that how much in the story of Hanukkah is tied to the sacrifices, to the offerings, to the temple. Today, as we pray the Amidah, we add special blessings, al-Chanisim, al-Hagvurot. We keep talking about the great victories that God sent us, the miracles that he bestowed upon us at this time, long ago, to our ancestors. So we add this, and if you notice how much of our prayers are focused about sacrifice and offerings, that you really cannot utilize Jewish prayers without talking about these things. So it's very central. So what he does is what's naturally. He says, let's worship God, let's fall before him, that he will deliver us out of this situation. That's the only hope that the high priest really has as the leader of the people. So it continues on. I'm going to keep reading at 3:27. It says, whereupon God warned him in the dream. Oh, that's interesting. We've been reading in the Torah about dreams of all sorts, right? So God warns him in the dream, which came upon him after he had offered sacrifice. So after he worshiped God, God gave him a dream. Okay? And adorn the city and open the gates, that the rest appear in white garments, but he and the priest should meet the king in the habits proper to their order. I know that sounds very English. In the habits, it's like we're talking about. Sorry, Winston, English, old English translation. So in the garments proper to their order, without the dread of any ill consequences, which the providence of God would prevent. So, of course, Josephus already knows the story. And so he narrates it like it's already said and done. But he kind of gives you a little bit of hints. He says, basically, the dream that he received, come out of the city, open the gates, welcome them. Do not bring weapons, okay? Just welcome them. And welcome them in your priestly garments and just see what happens, basically. God will provide a salvation for you. Nothing bad will happen. So that's how the story continues to be told. It says, for Alexander, when he saw the multitude at a distance in white garments, while the priest stood clothed with fine linen, and the high priest in purple and scarlet clothing, with his mitre on his head, having the golden plate on which the name of God was engraved, he approached by himself and adored that name, and first saluted the high priest. Look what happens. Alexander sees the committee welcoming him, and in the front of the committee are the priests. And the high priest is at the very front, and he's wearing his priestly garments. He goes out of the city. It says, all the historical record says that they exited the city. They wanted to meet him way on the outskirts. Okay? So I imagine they probably went to like the Mount Scopus, right? Har HaTzofim in Jerusalem, if you've ever been there, where the Hadassah Hospital. They probably went all the way over there, and the city is kind of far behind them, but here they are, meeting the delegation. So that would have been the valley through which the armies would have had to march anyway, because it's really the only wide enough place where such a massive amount of people can come up to Jerusalem. So here they are standing, and Alexander sees the high priest, and he sees the name of God engraved on the forehead of the priest. If you know the priestly garments, the priests wore a special plaque on their head that says, "Holy to the Lord," right? Kadosh Ladonai. It says right there, Yod He Vav He, Hashem's name is on his forehead engraved. And so he sees that, and he greets him. Or it says he salutes him first, which is a big deal. Because normally, you're supposed to salute the king first, and if he responds, even if he responds, that's like really nice. He doesn't have to. You say hello to him, he doesn't have to say hello to you. But he comes and he salutes the high priest first. At least that's how Josephus tells the story. And it says, the Jews also did altogether with one voice salute Alexander and encompass him about, whereupon the kings of Syria and the rest were surprised at what Alexander had done, and supposed him disordered in his mind. He's gone crazy, probably. That's what they're thinking. They're the kings of Syria. Remember, those are all the different armies, all the people that he conquered. If he didn't conquer them, if they decided to join him in his cause, they became, sort of say, his comrades at arms. And so here they are on their way to conquer Jerusalem, and they see this, and they say, he must be out of his mind. Something's wrong. It says, however, Parmenio alone went up to him. So his friend goes up to him and asked him how it came to pass that when all others adored him, he should adore the high priest of the Jews. Now, who would have heard of that? You're not supposed to do that. Don't you know, Alexander? You're the king. You're the emperor. You're the conqueror. They're supposed to bow to you. You're not supposed to bow to them. But he bowed. He greeted the high priest. He is the one who saluted him first. So that's how Josephus tells the story. Well, guess what? Alexander has a perfectly good answer. To whom him replied, I did not adore him, but that God who has honored him with that high priesthood. For I saw this very person in a dream, in this very habit, when I was at Dios in Macedonia, who when I was considering with myself how I might obtain the dominion of Asia, exhorted me to make no delay, but boldly pass over the sea, for that he would conduct my army and would give me dominion over the Persians. Whence it is that having seen no other in that habit, and now seeing this person in it, and remembering that vision and the exhortation which I had in my dream, I believe that I bring this army under divine conduct, and shall therewith conquer Darius, and destroy the power of the Persians, and all the things that succeed according to what is my own mind. So look, this is why he bowed to the priest. Because according to Alexander's words, and this is how Josephus tells the story, he had a dream. See, we're all about dreams right now, right? That's what we're reading in the Torah. He had a dream, and in his dream he saw a man wearing very distinct garment and clothing that he has never seen before. That now that he has seen this clothing again, he recognized it. And it was that high priest standing before him. Apparently in his dream, the person in his dream told him, go ahead, march to war against Darius. March against the Persians. You will be victorious. In fact, don't delay. Do it now. Now is the time. Seize this moment. Take it over. So in his dream, he has this amazing, sort of say, confirmation to him, right? Go ahead. And now he sees that same person who gives him this message in the dream standing before him. So what does he do? He's already been victorious. He's already conquered massive amount of lands. So he recognizes that this is the person from his dreams. So he salutes him. He bows to him and he recognizes his God. He says, I did not bow to him, but to God who gave him this post. Because this man had a message for me, and that message was from God, and so now I am divinely led, and my armies are divinely led to victory. That's the way he sees this. That person in the vision that he has seen is important to him. And now that he sees the same garments, he recognizes, he connects the dots, And so he acts very differently towards Jerusalem and towards the high priest that he could have acted. Remember, the high priest is trembling right there in his garments. He has no idea. All he has received is a dream from God. Come out, open the doors, welcome them, no weapons, put on your garments, and stand and welcome him into the city. And God did provide salvation, essentially, for the people of Jerusalem because Alexander had wanted probably to destroy the city, but completely changed his mind upon seeing the priest. So everyone is surprised because nobody really understands what's happening. But Alexander has it in his mind that somehow the high priest of Israel and his God are connected with his victories, and that everything is going to go according to how he wants, because basically the God of Israel has already said, that's okay, go ahead and do it. Isn't that amazing?
Yes,
This is absolutely an amazing story. I mean, I don't know how much of this is true, by the way, because this is Josephus telling a story, but he's drawing on all the sources and legends, whatever he knows in his time. We don't have any other historical accounts that corroborate, sort of say, these little details. I mean, we have the facts of history that he did not destroy Jerusalem, but we don't really know beyond that what made it so that he didn't. All we know is, little tiny bits and pieces. Josephus gives us this amazing detail.
I think in the Mishnah, there's a story like this, but the high priest is, they call him Shimon HaTzadik. And he goes out and meets. So wouldn't you say that that's like a corroboration? Like if Josephus, who's not...
Yeah, so remember, Josephus is writing this in like the 80. And, Mishnah doesn't come around till 200. And
So
then
it's
Talmud comes, even later. So we don't really know where that story comes from.
Right.
He's not drawing on that source. They're probably drawing on his source and his legend.
Right.
Go ahead.
Mishnah is just, it's oral tradition that's been passed. It just made it to paper at that point. So that could have been a story that was passed on from that time, and they both could be corroborating themselves. They didn't have to be.
We have no idea. So the tricky part is, with documents. So as students of history, we look at documents and we say, when did this document come to be? And that becomes our jump-off point. That doesn't mean that something that's recorded in a document it could be older. Sometimes the information is much older. It's been oral, as Josh said, and then it finally made it to paper. And so this is the unique part about Mishnah. So you notice a lot of times when I teach, I bring up Mishnah. And I teach from the Gospels, and I pull Mishnah into it. And people say, why do you do that? Well, because to me, they come from that same timeline, same era, the same roundabout vicinity, because many of the traditions that are recorded in the Mishnah are actually quite early. They're as early as the Gospels. Some of them are even earlier than the Gospels. And so they play into each other. And that's why I do that. So even though the Gospels were recorded way earlier than Mishnah. Same thing here. We don't always know where information comes from. All we have is the documents that we have and the best knowledge that we have of roughly when they came to be. And so sometimes tracing history is tricky. We don't know what came when. But there's actually, now that you bring up the story, there's actually very few stories that are like that. Has any one of you knows the story of conversion of Constantine? It was recorded by
He
Eusebius.
supposedly had a dream and saw some vision of Christ and...
Almost identical to this one, by the way. If you hit the high points, it's almost the same. How about Vespasian? Do you know that Josephus himself came to Vespasian and said, "You will be the next emperor. Go ahead, besiege Jerusalem. Do what you need to do. Basically, God is behind you. You're going to be the next emperor." Josephus actually, in his own writings, records how he predicted Vespasian becoming the next emperor. Of course, he writes it after all these things have happened, but you get the idea. There's actually a number of stories where I'm talking about conversion of Constantine is amazingly similar to this, where he has a dream, a vision, and says, "In this name conquer," right? And that Constantine says, "Well, I must become a Christian now, because here I had this vision." So this is the same thing. This is all about, in this name, conquer, because he adores the name of God on the priest's head. That's what he saluted, he says, according to his own words. So anyway, to me, all these stories are kind of an interconnected lore. Very, very interesting. Don't really know which one came first or second, but this is still, we're reading antiquity. We're reading ancient documents. So interesting conversation. So you ready for more? Antiquities 11. We continue reading. And he had given the high priest his right hand, and the priest ran along by him. And he came into the city, and when he went up into the temple, he offered sacrifice to God according to the high priest's direction, and magnificently treated both the high priest and the priests. Now, this is pretty interesting. Alexander the Great, according to this legend, goes to Jerusalem and offers sacrifices in Jerusalem temple. Like, he doesn't offer it himself, he just pays for them, let's put it that way. He pays the bill. And the priests offer the sacrifices. But they're for him on his behalf, okay? He is the worshiper, they are the mediators. Okay, so, and he treats everybody very nicely. So, Josephus continues. He says, and when the book of Daniel was shown to him, where Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that he himself was the person indeed intended. And he was then glad. And he dismissed the multitude for the present, but the next day he called them to him and bade them to ask what favors they pleased of him. So, while he's visiting Jerusalem, they pull out the book of Daniel. And they read it to him. You know what's happening right now, Alexander? I think our prophets have talked about it. And this is what they said. And they're going to go to the visions of Daniel, right? About all the beasts and all the things. And they say, what we think is going to happen, the way we understand this, is that the Greeks are going to demolish Persians. And he says, well, that must be me. It must be about me. That's how he interpreted the visions that they conveniently shared with him. You know, they didn't have to do that, but they brought out the book. And because he was so happy that he now got even one more validation that God is on his side and that all of his conquest is completely divinely ordained as far as Jerusalem and the God that Jerusalem serves is. And remember, for Greeks, all gods are the same. It really doesn't matter. This God, that God. They just see this whole magical universe of multiplicity of deities who are all powerful. Not all powerful, but all of them have certain amounts of power and they all interact, and some of them get the upper hand and others don't. And so apparently at that moment, he's seeing Jerusalem deity as his, patron deity, blessed by the God of Israel. So he says that's a good sign. Therefore, he says, look, even the prophets have predicted my victory long time ago. You know where prophecies of Daniel took place? In the palace of King Nebuchadnezzar. The very place where Alexander later dies himself. Because he does take over Babylon too. And he dies there. So he says, all right, this is great news. You guys go for a while. I'm going to think on this. And then he calls them back and says, ask me whatever you want. You guys have delivered such great news to me. Whatever you want, what are your wishes? What do you really want? He's in the position to grant them some wishes. So they have their list. So what is on your Hanukkah list, right? What is on your Hanukkah? I don't know if you want to guess any of the wishes they would have had. Anybody has an idea of what might be on their wish list?
Well, leave us alone.
That's a good one. Leave us alone. Please do not destroy us, and could you please take your soldiers with you as you leave? Maybe something like that. Any other guesses to what the wishes of the high priest might have been? He had some pretty specific ones. He actually had a list. He had
How
a
about
list.
let us continue to worship?
Let us continue to worship. Bingo. That's one of them. That's one of those important wishes. So, whereupon the high priest desired that they might enjoy the laws of their forefathers and might pay no tribute on the 7th year. Let us continue to follow our ways, the ways of our forefathers. Basically, do not meddle with our religion. And can we please do not pay taxes in the 7th year? Well, why is the 7th year important?
Jubilee?
Shemitah. Not Jubilee. Jubilee is 50th year. Shemitah. So every 7th year, Shemitah, Shemitah, Shemitah. That means no harvest.
Right.
Right, so we're going to pay tribute from stuff we don't have. That means we have to save a lot to pay, and pagans don't care. They don't do Shemitah. They don't understand why crazy Jews would want to take a whole year off. They don't understand why Jews want to take every Saturday off. Okay, now a whole year? Now you're really bonkers. So, people don't understand. That's okay. So they said, could you please not pay tribute on the 7th year? He granted all they desired. And when they treated him, that he would permit the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws also. So let us be, right? But now that you're going to go conquer Babylon, can the Jews of Babylon be protected too? And whatever government you set up over there, can they have the same arrangement we have here in Jerusalem? Can you extend these same allowances that you gave us to them as well? Because we have brothers, we have relatives out there, we have cousins in Babylon and Media and Persia. And when everything gets done, can they have the same privileges? So it says that he willingly promised to do whatever that they desired. He's very agreeable right now. And when he said to the multitude that if any of them would enlist themselves in his army on this condition, that they should continue under the law of their forefathers and live according to them, he was willing to take them with him. Many were ready to accompany him in his wars. Wow. So he made them an offer in return. In fact, if following the laws of your forefathers is so important to you, how about this? You want to join my army? You want to fight beside me? I will make sure that you will be allowed to follow your laws even as you serve me in my army. Meaning, you can have Shabbat off, okay? And holidays and all these different things, whatever you have to do, I will honor that. I will allow you to follow the ways of your ancestors, even if you are in my army. I'm going to let you off the hook. Special exemptions. That's what we're talking about. He's offering them benefits to join his army. A sign-on bonus. So, interesting, right? You didn't see that one coming on the... So, they had a list, and he had a counter-offer too. So, by the way, a number of Jews did enlist and fight for the Greeks. And then later on, if you know this or not, quite a few Jews also fought for the Romans. And they actually enjoyed the privileges. This same laws that we're talking about, this way of treating Jews and allowing them to have their own customs and traditions and to follow their ways of life, Romans actually rubber stamped that and just kept going with it. We have stories that tell us how Romans were allowing special food to be imported just for the Jewish part of their military. Special food just for them.
Wow.
They were like bringing it all the way from Judea. Not food, but mostly like olive oil. That was the biggest deal. They did not like the olive oil of the Greeks. They felt that it was somehow contaminated, so there was this big racket going on, actually. Josephus talks a lot about it. So there were all sorts of allowances that they've received, and Jews have enjoyed relative protections under the Greek law and then later Roman law, where other nations were not allowed to do what they wanted. Other nations were told, no, you cannot worship the way your forefathers worshiped. You got to become Greek. You got to follow our gods. You got to worship the way we do it, and we brought a whole bunch of these gods with you, so please pick one. And Jews didn't have to do that. They were allowed to worship their own way. Why? Because of this story of Alexander that we read about. Apparently, that's what stands behind these laws that somehow exempted Jews from the rules that everybody else had to follow. So maybe you've heard about these laws. People who study the history in that era often comment about them. So here we are, back at the map. Remember, Alexander dies, his empire breaks up into pieces. So if Ptolemy, Seleucus right here, look at all that. All of that is Seleucus. And here's Israel caught in the middle of that. So we've been talking about villains. We've been talking about heroes. I don't know where you place Alexander, as I mentioned before. he's kind of one of these people that is hard to place. At this story, in this moment, he seems to be the good guy, right?
At least we could say Alexander was used of God at that time to protect the Jews.
Good things came to Jews because of this relationship with Jerusalem. Let's put it that way.
He had issues with
He had issues, yes, but no.
I heard a thought saying that I guess there's a verse that says that like right after the nakedness of Noah and the one son found him, then after Shem and Japheth covered their father's nakedness, that it said that God would bless Shem and Japheth, that this was the fulfillment of that Alexander having so much success conquering was God blessing Japheth, which is like the Greek line, and then Shem is the Jews, and yeah.
Very interesting thought, going all the way back to Noah. Maybe it's true. I mean, I've heard that as well. I thank you for bringing that up. That's a nice little insight. So, the Greeks might have had it coming to them. Let's put it that way, in this way. All right. So, I'm going to keep talking a little bit more about villains. We have a few more minutes, and villains and heroes some more. So here I have Jason, Menelaus, and the Tobiads. I don't know if you know if they're heroes or villains or not, but let me give you a little bit of history and we'll decide. So Anias the first, and Anias is a Hebrew name, Honi, son of Jaddua. Who is Jaddua? Well, Jaddua is the priest that we just talked about, the one that welcomed Alexander to Jerusalem. He was the high priest in the days of Alexander the Great, so Jaddua goes away, Anias the first comes in, and then his sons served in his stead, so there's Anias second and third. Anias third, the high priest, was around the year 175 BCE, and this is when the Seleucids are already in power. And apparently Anias the third is controlled by the Seleucids. Remember, they're the kings, really, and he's just the high priest in Israel. He has to do what they say, and he pretty much is kept in place by them. They give him his authority. So Anias III, Honi, was succeeded by a priest named Yeshua. And he changed his name to Jason, by the way. That's what Josephus tells us. Yeshua is an Aramaic form of Yehoshua, by the way. If you didn't figure this out, that's a shortened version of Yehoshua. So his full name would have been Yehoshua. It's a good priestly name. He changes his name to Jason. Sounds a bit more Hellenistic. Yes. Fit in with the crowd. And so in the year 171 CE, I'm sorry, that shouldn't be BCE. Actually, yeah, BCE, correct. In the year 171 BCE, his brother Menelaus offered a bribe to Antiochus, and he took a priesthood away from him. So basically, both of these guys paid Antiochus. His brother just paid more. So, so now the priesthood goes from Jason to Menelaus. We're brothers. And of course, Jason, whose name is Yeshua, he doesn't like that. So he tries to take back the priesthood. He actually tries to fight his brother and to get it back. So he gets the whole, tiny little squabble turned out to try to retake his priesthood away. Somebody was raising hands?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, at what point did the priesthood change from the Zadok line to something else? Was it around here?
No, it was. I think that shift occurred after Babylon.
Okay.
So Tzadok line lasted, and then it shifted to another priestly family. There's a number of priestly families. So this particular priestly family held on pretty much up until the events of the first century. And by then, this is the moment when priesthood gets so irreparably corrupted. Basically, it's sold for money. And at this point, some of the people that are going to become priests from this point on, from Antiochus, from the Seleucid rule, they don't have a business of being priests because, number one, they're not good people. They shouldn't. Number two, some of them don't even have the right birthright. They're actually not even descendants of Aaron. They're just buying it for money. They marry into the priestly family, and because they're married to one of the relatives of the priest, they get to be the priest. Well, that's not heredity. That's not how Torah sets it up. But nevertheless, So we have a few names here that pop up. So Jason, Menelaus, and then the Tobiats. Tobiats is another important priestly family, and they actually live on the other side of the Jordan River. Very, very important. Josephus talks about them. They were very influential, very wealthy Jews, very tightly connected with the Ptolemies in Egypt. That's to whom they owed their allegiance. But at that point, they're considering jumping ship. Why? Well, because the Seleucids are actually right next door to them, and they're stronger right now. Jews are always caught in the middle. So here, this perhaps will help you to decide who is a villain and who's a good guy here. This is Antiquities 12. It says, upon the death of Ananias, the high priest, they gave the priesthood to Jesus, his brother. So this is Ananias the third. And it says, but this Jesus, who was the brother of Ananias, was deprived of the priesthood by the king. The king here is Antiochus IV, who was angry with him and gave it to his younger brother, whose name was also Ananias. Remember, Ananias, this Ananias, he didn't go by Ananias. He went by Menelaus. And it says, then Jesus changed his name to Jason, but Ananias is called Menelaus. So these are the people I'm talking about. If I lost you, I'm sorry. But we're talking about Ananias III, who is going away, and he has one of the sons who happens to have the same name, and he has a brother. And so Jason and Menelaus, that's how we know them today. Those are the names they preferred. Now the former high priest, Jesus, raised a sedition against Menelaus, who was ordained after him. The multitude were divided between them both. And the sons of Tobias took the part of Menelaus. But the greater part of the people assisted Jason. So look what happened. The populace, the popular opinion was that Jason, who was the older brother, is supposed to be the high priest because Ananias, his father, is gone. So it's normally that it would go to the older son. And most of the people say, that seems right. Just because Menelaus paid a greater bribe and got it from Antiochus, some people say, well, that's not right. I don't think that's right. So most of the people were on the side of Jason. They wanted him to continue. But Menelaus paid more money to Antiochus. So Antiochus says, no, you're the guy. And they have this squabble. And now the people are caught in between because people are supporting the priest that they think should be the priest, even though he's not even a great choice to begin with. But he's better than his brother.
Who are the sons of Tobias?
The sons of Tobias, forget their names. But the sons of Tobias are the descendants. Tobiat family is, again, it's a priestly aristocratic family that actually served in a temple, and they built their domain, sort of say, on the other side of the Jordan River. They moved outside of Jerusalem. They kind of got their compound going over there. And so I don't remember their names. So like Joseph is the one that I'm thinking of. Joseph, son of Tobias. He's the famous one. He gets talked about quite a bit. Tobias is kind of like their last name when I think about it. It's not really their proper name. A lot of the names that we get here sometimes are nickname. Okay, the Tobiat is a dynasty because they come from Tovia, essentially. They come from that. And so they all become that. The same thing with Maccabees. Maccabees are called Hashmonaim because they come from Hashmon. And that becomes like a family name. So this, this is way before last names, but that's kind of the closest thing to it.
When you say that they put their encampment outside of the Jordan, is that like going back to like when they set up altars, like to try and be
Back
connected,
then,
or
that was Israel proper.
Okay.
Today, it's called the country of Jordan.
Okay.
But back then, that was actually the territory that Israel had. It was their land. It was even ruled by Herods and so on. And so, they were still within Israel, but they were on the other side of Jordan. So
Right,
to say. So
right.
that's kind of they were a little distance from Jerusalem, but they had quite an impressive compound, which is actually still standing today.
Wow.
Not many people get to see those ruins because they're in Jordan. Not too many buses venture that way, but yeah, it's still there. So you can see these guys are fighting for the priesthood, and of course the Seleucids are involved in all this, and this is almost like a civil war fight, and it's all over priesthood. Who's going to be the priest? Who's going to be the priest? It's a powerful position. So it continues, and it says, and by that means, Menelaus and the sons of Tobias were distressed. So they were not happy that they weren't enjoying the popular support. They were outnumbered. They were minority, but they had the king's support. And they retired to Antiochus and informed him that they were, desirous to leave the laws of their country and the Jewish way of living according to them, and to follow the king's laws and the Grecian way of living. So basically he says, we're in a minority, but please keep us in power, because if you do, we're going to turn Israel into a Greek type government. We're going to turn Greek. Everybody's going to be following this way. So they are reversing what Alexander has allowed.
And in essence, they're breaking the covenant.
They're changing the precedent. They're changing the narrative completely. Remember, Alexander allowed them to be their own. That was the deal with, Alexander the Great. And they're saying, we don't want that deal. We would like to be Greeks, please. And it gets worse. I mean, it says, and wherefore they desired his permission to build them a gymnasium at Jerusalem. So gymnasium is a sporting place, so a sporting venue. They wanted a big, huge sporting venue. And when they had given them leave, they also hid the circumcision of their genitals. Even when they were naked, they might appear to be Greeks. Accordingly, they left off all the customs that belonged to their own country and imitated the practices of other nations. And these were high priests. So that kind of gives you an idea of how bad things were if the high priest wants to surgically reverse his circumcision so that he can look Greek naked. Very, very painful operation, but we do have a number of records actually from antiquity that talk about these things. So I know it's scary stuff. I don't want to talk about it, but I know it makes me feel uncomfortable. But it is there. There it is. There it is. This was a big deal. They wanted to be Greeks that bad. That bad. So this is where we find, by now you probably figured out these guys are definitely not heroes. Because that's the direction they want to take. And all this happens to set up the story of Hanukkah. Because guess what? When the heroes emerge, that's who they're going to fight. Okay? The Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, Matityahu, son of Yohanan, the grandson of Simon, the Hasmon. This family is known as Hashmonaim because they come from Hasmon. And so he's a priest in Modin. They moved to Modin. They moved from Jerusalem to Modin, probably to get away from all this craziness. They're saying the neighborhood is going in the wrong direction. It's time for us to move. So they go to Modin, and some of the sources interestingly trace him all the way to Pinchas, the one of the sons of Aaron in Exodus. Remember Pinchas? Yeah. The one who speared? Yeah. Right? So he's one of the sons of Aaron. He's the high priest. So there are some genealogies that trace Matityahu all the way back to that. Now, I don't know if those genealogies are correct or not, because there are other genealogies that show him in a different direction, a different place. I don't know. But, interestingly enough, Josephus does not talk about Mattathias being a high priest. He does not mention that he's the high priest. He just calls him the priest. And I kind of like Josephus. I trust him because he knows his stuff. He was one of the priests, so it's his family. He should have known the difference. If he was a high priest, he probably should have called him that. But he doesn't. He just calls him the priest. But then some of the Jewish sources actually call him the high priest, including the prayer book. Prayer book definitely calls him the high priest. So, Mattatyahu had 5 sons: Yehuda, Eleazar, Shimon, Yochanan, and Yonatan. So they're definitely the heroes. The Maccabees are the heroes. So we call them Hashmonaim, Hasmoneans. But the other name we have for them is Maccabees. Okay, where that name comes from is a lot of people think that it comes as an acronym from the famous words that we chant. We chant them when we sing from the Torah, Exodus chapter 15. Sometimes when we pray, we chant those words, even in the service. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Right? This is the phrase we say. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Remember that? So go every first letter. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Maccabee. Maccabee. So it becomes an acronym. So some people think that the name Maccabee, because nobody really knows where the name Maccabee came from. People are kind of like, I don't know how. We know them as Hashmonaim, but how did they become Maccabees? So some people say, oh, that's where it comes from. And of course, there are other traditions that come in and say, oh, that means the hammer, so therefore that's what it means. Did you hear any of those traditions being
Yeah,
taught?
the Maccabee, Mikamocha Baalim.
You heard that one?
Yes.
Okay. So there's different ones. Some people say, oh, Maccabee hammers, so because they hammered the Greeks and all sorts of interesting, but nobody really knows how their name came to be. I kind of like the Maccabee Michamocha tradition, so I like that. You know, who Michamocha Baalim Adonai means who is like you, O Lord, among the gods. Think about that. How cool is that to have that as an acronym for your name? You're basically building in a faith statement into your name.
Right.
Who is like you, O Lord? All these other gods? You're not like any of them. Anyway, it's a beautiful tradition. Don't know if it's true or not, but that's what it is. So we have the Maccabees, and they're definitely the heroes, and they're the ones who essentially start the war. And that's how the story proceeds. It says, in those days, Mattathias, the son of John, son of Simeon, the priest of the family of Joarib, moved from Jerusalem and settled in Modin. He saw the blasphemies being committed in Judah and Jerusalem and said, alas, why was I born to see this, the ruin of my people, the ruin of the holy city, and to live there when it was given over to the enemy, the sanctuary given over to aliens. So he's really upset at what's going on in Jerusalem, and they move out. Sounds familiar? Remember when we studied these scenes a little while ago, we talked about these scenes, the Qumran Jews, that's exactly what they did. Around the same time, they said, we don't like what's going on here. You guys are getting too friendly with the outsiders, and you're allowing them in the temple, and you're allowing them to influence what's going on, and they're getting involved in the politics. The priesthood becomes now too political. It's no longer pure, it's defiled, it's not about God. I'm taking my stuff and I'm leaving. And they go away. Again, they protest what's happening. And so this is another, essentially, Mattathias is another one of those priests who protests what's happening because he does not want to be a part of it. But, you know, the blasphemies, as Josephus describes them, they continue, and eventually they do find him because they do come to Modin and they say, we need you to show by your example that you're okay with the king's laws. And that's when the revolt breaks out. So you know that story. So we kind of ran out of time, so I'm not going to be able to read that with you. But this is the setup of Hanukkah. And that's why I wanted to tell you the story. The story is way bigger than a lot of times the way it is being told today, especially in some of the books. The history is really quite detailed and very, very interesting to realize how all these events culminated to make this possible. So when we express this deep spirituality of Hanukkah, and Hanukkah is essentially it's a minor holiday. It's not like it's commanded in the Torah or anything like that. It's a minor holiday, but it's a meaningful holiday because it has a very deep spiritual message behind it. And so now perhaps you understand why it's not a big deal because it's not commanded in the Torah, but then it is a big deal because the message that it carries is a really powerful message. It reverberates with the idea of God preserving his remnant, and those people are being faithful to his covenant, and the few overcoming the many. And goodness and righteousness gets restored even out of just a few people. Just a handful of people can basically hold the covenant. And that's what we see in the story of Hanukkah. To me, that's kind of the crux of it. That's at the very heart of it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this little trail through villains and heroes. We'll continue that next time. So we're